Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Off to the side were Beihan Lai and Lu Tinlei, who had taken responsibility for keeping an eye on Nightcrypt. Their pupils constricted from the pure shock they felt at seeing the power of his divination magic. The area went deathly quiet, and all eyes were riveted on Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun stuck his chin up proudly, reveling in the astonishment. Master God Diviner seemed nearly shocked to death, and was trembling on the verge of collapse. His discomfort and incredulity was like music to Bai Xiaochun's ears. How dare you try to compete with me, puny master snort, he thought. HMPH. In any other sect it would have been impossible, but the Spirit Stream sect is my home. Don't tell me you're going to try to get me to do some more divinations? I could walk around with my eyes closed and not get lost. Bai Xiaochun felt more wonderful than ever. His dream of always being the center of attention was being realized now more than ever. Just when Bai Xiaochun was about to step down from his pedestal of triumph, Master God Diviner's face twisted into a vicious expression, and he shrieked, "Hold on a second. Nightcrypt got lucky just now. Anybody can see that the violet chi rising from this immortal's cave is beyond ordinary. I refuse to believe that he found it by divination." All of a sudden, Song Junwan frowned, and the group from the Spirit Stream sect hesitated, and began to wonder if a divination had truly been performed. Bai Xiaochun immediately stopped in place and glared at Master God Diviner. "Don't believe me, huh? Fine, I'll just have to convince you." Snorting coldly, Bai Xiaochun closed his eyes. This time, he took even longer than before, and even as people's suspicions deepened, he suddenly opened his eyes, which overflowed with bizarre, swirling light. His expression seemed even more solemn than before, and he even radiated a deathly, somber aura. His gaze settled onto a nearby immortal's cave, which he pointed at and said, that immortal's cave was struck by lightning in the past. Zhou Xingqi's pupils constricted. The immortal's cave that he was pointing at had been hers when she was in the inner sect, and had been destroyed by lightning because of Bai Xiaochun's pill concocting. She wasn't the only one that realized this. The other cultivators from Fragrant Cloud Peak all remembered what had occurred, and their expressions flickered. The Bloodstream sect cultivators were once again shocked. They couldn't see any signs that lightning had struck the area, and yet clearly, the Spirit Stream sect cultivators' silence spoke volumes. Shockingly, Nightcrypt had yet again performed a successful divination. Master God Diviner gritted his teeth and was about to offer a response, but Bai Xiaochun wasn't finished. Expression flickering with odd light, he looked more closely at the immortal's cave and then took a deep breath in through his nose. "I can sense the lingering aroma of makeup. If my divinations are correct, this immortal's cave was not only struck by lightning, it belonged to a female disciple." He swished his sleeve proudly. Then, to the shock of the surrounding cultivators, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and declared, "Furthermore, my divinations reveal that the female disciple was a top beauty in the sect. Hold on, let me divine her name. She was a young woman surnamed Zhou." He abruptly spun in place to look at the shocked Zhou Xingqi. After examining her closely, he pointed at her. This was your immortal's cave." The Spirit Stream sect cultivators immediately cried out in shock and disbelief. Beihan Lai and Lu Tinlei gasped, and Big Fatty Zhang trembled even harder than before. Xu Meisheng's eyes flickered with cold light. She wasn't sure whether this Bloodstream sect cultivator had actually performed a divination, or whether he had access to inside information. Either option was shocking in its own way, and killing intent toward Nightcrypt suddenly rose up inside of her. After a moment of silence, Zhou Xingqi's gaze turned icy, and she nodded. That nod caused the Bloodstream sect cultivator's eyes to widen even further. As for Master God Diviner, he felt like his mind was being struck by lightning, to the point where he didn't know what to say. How could this be possible, he thought, trembling, mind reeling. He still couldn't believe that what he was seeing was the truth. After all, he hadn't sensed even a trace of a divination aura, and yet, Nightcrypt had obviously divined the information correctly. Song Junwan looked more enlivened than ever. Her background check into Nightcrypt had revealed that he occasionally performed divinations as an intersect disciple, and yet, she could never have imagined that he would be even more powerful than Master God Diviner. Bai Xiaochun felt more proud of himself than ever at the reactions he was getting. Enlivened, he stepped forward and took the initiative to lead the group through Fragrant Cloud Peak. That role should have been taken by Xu Meixiang or Zhou Xingqi, but now, Bai Xiaochun would close his eyes, take a few steps, then open them and explain matters that left the Spirit Stream sect in shock. Of course, Bai Xiaochun was careful to only reveal appropriate information and nothing confidential. Stopping near a crack in a boulder, his expression turned serious, and he said, "And here. The cracks in these stones seem odd. Hold on, let me perform a divination." Yes. It seems that snakes once emerged from these rocks. Lots of them. Tons in fact. This place over here was also struck by lightning. Heavens. How many areas on Fragrant Cloud Peak got hit by lightning? He led the group along, stopping here and there to point out various locations. Eventually he reached 10,000 Medicines Pavilion. Looking around with a sigh of admiration and utmost respect, he said, "I can sense a powerful aura here." Apparently, some consummately powerful individual once stood in this exact spot, looking down upon all creation. He must have been the #1 master of plants and vegetation. Soon, they were at the missions office, where Bai Xiaochun let out an exclamation of shock. Aha! This must be the missions office. At some point in the near past, a domineering individual swept through the missions here. I can sense the aura of a bird here, some sort of a huge bird. Something seems very odd here. According to my divinations, many chickens went missing from this location. As he led the group through Fragrant Cloud Peak, offering commentary here and there, the group from the Spirit Stream sect was left more and more stunned. Everything he said was correct, without even a single mistake. It was almost as if Night Crypt had once lived in the Spirit Stream sect. Zhou Xinqi was left panting. Lu Tinlei and Beihan Lai saw the expression on her face, and were more shocked than before. As for Xu Meixiang, the coldness in her eyes grew more intense. The old woman from Iris Petal Peak was equally shaken. The things that Night Crypt were describing were all trivial matters, and yet it was still shocking that he knew so much information. People began to guess how he was doing it, and some of them even speculated that he might have infiltrated the Spirit Stream sect at some point in the past. However, the Bloodstream sect cultivators were aware that Night Crypt had never been to the Spirit Stream sect, which left them all completely shaken. Master God Diviner felt like he was being inundated by lightning. He was completely taken aback. He could tell that the Spirit Stream sect's grand spell formation was activated, and would prevent even the slightest bit of augury magic. Even when he tried to release a bit of it, he felt like he was being suffocated. And yet Night Crypt was so powerful that he could walk along performing auguries the entire way. Furthermore, he was using some sort of magic that Master God Diviner couldn't even detect. The casual way he went about it was completely and utterly shocking. Master God Diviner even started to doubt his own abilities. To the people from the Bloodstream sect, there was only one explanation: Night Crypt had skill in divination that could shake heaven and earth. After touring the length and breadth of Fragrant Cloud Peak, Bai Xiaochun felt more pleased than ever. Everyone else seemed to be in a daze, even unsettled. It was at that point that Big Fatty Zhang looked over at Xu Meixiang and noticed a certain look in her eyes. Without any further hesitation, he stepped forward and pointed at Bai Xiaochun. "Senior Night Crypt," he growled. "Since you're so good at divination, why don't you reveal some information about me?" Everything went completely silent. The Bloodstream sect cultivators looked over at Bai Xiaochun, and Master God Diviner's eyes suddenly began to shine. "Divining information about inanimate objects is easy." Master God Diviner chuckled inwardly. "Divining information about people is much more difficult. I refuse to believe that Night Crypt could be so ridiculously powerful when it comes to divining information about people." Bai Xiaochun looked at Big Fatty Zhang, a strange expression on his face. Realizing that he couldn't just back down now, he closed his eyes, and his expression turned solemn. Big Fatty Zhang was inwardly very nervous. However, Xu Meixiang had clearly indicated that he needed to test out Night Crypt. As he looked at Night Crypt there with his eyes closed, Big Fatty Zhang's heart began to pound. After about 10 breaths of time passed, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, and looked over at Big Fatty Zhang. Voice cool, he said, "You have a good life, young man. You come from a rich family, and will have incredible good fortune in the future." Big Fatty Zhang was a bit taken aback. Bai Xiaochun hadn't said much, and actually, there was no way to refute any of his words. Big Fatty Zhang looked over anxiously at Xu Meixiang. Although Xu Meixiang seemed to be smiling, her wariness of Night Crypt was only growing. Strange expressions could be seen on the faces of the Spirit Stream sect cultivators. The words spoken by Night Crypt just now had been pleasing to the ear, and were virtually impossible to criticize. Gritting his teeth, Big Fatty Zhang said, "Your divination is—" "You used to be fat," Bai Xiaochun interrupted. "Very fat. You started out in the ovens, and then by chance you became an outer sect disciple." Let me divine some more information." "Yes." You faced many twists and turns along the way, and came to be an outer sect disciple because of matters pertaining to profit. Big Fatty Zhang gasped, and his hair stood on end as he looked at Bai Xiaochun. Almost all of his secrets had been instantly seen through. Everyone else from the Spirit Stream sect stood there in shocked silence. Seeing how Night Crypt had single-handedly astonished all of the Spirit Stream sect cultivators, Song Junwan covered her mouth and laughed charmingly. Everyone says that Bai Xiaochun from the Spirit Stream sect is breathtaking and peerless with his Heaven Dao Foundation establishment, she said. However, from what I can see, Night Crypt from the Bloodstream sect, with a mere mortal Dao Foundation establishment cultivation base, seems a complete match. Regardless of whether it's his shrewdness, his cultivation base, or his latent talent, he seems just as stunning as Bai Xiaochun. What a pity that Bai Xiaochun is in secluded meditation, otherwise they could have a bit of a competition to see who is more spectacular. Bai Xiaochun's heart immediately began to pound. How could he possibly have a competition with himself? Have his left hand fight his right hand? Looking down at his hands, he blinked a few times. The Spirit Stream sect cultivators' expressions were the same as ever, but inwardly they were laughing derisively. As far as they were concerned, what made Bai Xiaochun the most powerful was not his cultivation base or his battle prowess, but his disastrous medicinal pills. Big Fatty Zhang looked over contemptuously at Night Crypt and thought, you can tell at a glance that this monster Night Crypt is good at nothing more than fighting and augury. How could he possibly compare with Bai Xiaochun? If they competed, Bai Xiaochun would toy with him like a cat toys with a mouse. Bai Xiaochun would just toss out some medicinal pill, and Night Crypt would be wiped out of existence so cleanly you couldn't bury him. Bai Xiaochun felt a bit embarrassed as he looked around at the Spirit Stream sect cultivators. There was no need for him to even speculate what all of them were thinking, and it made him sigh sadly. Having two identities is a real headache. I guess you can only blame my outstanding nature. Bai Xiaochun shook his head and sighed. Xu Meixiang smiled slightly, but didn't take the bait. Instead, she led the Bloodstream sect cultivators on a simple tour of Violet Cauldron Peak and Green Crest Peak. No matter what anybody said, Bai Xiaochun refused to perform any more divinations. He followed along at the end of the line, allowing these two mountain peaks to impress the Bloodstream sect people with their might. By this point, the Bloodstream sect was starting to understand how powerful the Spirit Stream sect was. After completing the tour of the South Bank, they headed toward the North Bank. At that point, Xu Meixiang relinquished the lead to the old woman from Iris Petal Peak. The old woman was relatively reticent, and didn't say much as she led the way. However, before Song Junwan and the Bloodstream sect cultivators could even step onto the North Bank, the battle beasts threw their heads back and roared. Heaven and earth trembled as an enormous shockwave rolled out. Expressions of shock appeared on the faces of the Bloodstream sect disciples, and Song Junwan's eyes widened. To have so many countless battle beasts releasing such explosive auras was something none of them took lightly. Although the battle beasts didn't actually appear in the open, their aura was so powerful that it created an intense pressure that weighed down on the Bloodstream sect forces. It actually made it impossible for them to proceed on to the North Bank, leaving them stuck between it and Mount Deoseed. My apologies, the old woman said coolly, her eyes flashing with cold light. The North Bank of the Spirit Stream sect is a bit lacking in manners. Diplomatic missions usually go to the South Bank. Your request to visit the North Bank caught me a bit off guard, Grand Elder Song. Bai Xiaochun felt somewhat shocked. Looking at things from the perspective of an outsider, the Spirit Stream sect clearly seemed to be soft on the outside, but as hard as steel on the inside. That dichotomy was epitomized by the South and North Banks. The South Bank seemed soft and warm, but the North Bank was hard and tough. They complemented each other, using different methods to threaten and unnerve the enemy. Song Junwan's face was a bit pale. She knew the Spirit Stream sect was strong, but had never imagined that they would be this powerful. Back on the South Bank, the spell formation seemed to pulse with soft warmth, and yet, was filled with biting power. It had been very shocking. In contrast, the North Bank was impossible to even enter. The strength emanating from the battle beasts made it such that any person who desired to go to war with the Spirit Stream sect would clearly need to be prepared to pay a heavy price. And that was only what the Spirit Stream sect was allowing the Bloodstream sect to see. They are gentle and reserved, but also powerful and unyielding, Song Junwan thought. Clearly they are capable of being merciless. How threatening. Plus, they certainly have unfathomable powers held in reserve. Behind her, the others from the Bloodstream sect were speechless, their hearts filled with pounding waves of astonishment. Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt proud of the Spirit Stream sect, including both the South and North Banks. Furthermore, he couldn't help but grin inwardly when he looked over at the north bank and began to search among the various auras for bruisers. Please don't take offense, the old woman said. Fellow Taoists from the Bloodstream sect, I'm afraid we really can't continue on with a tour of the north bank. The north bank is a bit crude, and it would be horrible if the battle beasts got out of control and started eating people. She smiled, although to the people from the Bloodstream sect, it seemed quite intimidating. After a moment of thought, Song Junwan said, that's fine. However, even as she smiled, a howl rose up from the north bank that instantly caught the attention of everyone present. It seemed to crush the auras of most of the other battle beasts, and as it spread out, the north bank disciples were shocked to discover that their own battle beasts began to tremble in response. The beasts looked up, seemingly more violently agitated than before, more brutal, and more energetic. It was as if they were being incited as a group, their spirits rising as they howled. A powerful energy caused a mountain toppling, sea-draining force to rumble toward the Bloodstream sect forces. The massive blast caused the faces of the Bloodstream sect cultivators to fall. As they edged backward, Song Junwan's pupils constricted, and she also fell back. The old woman from Irispetal Peak also seemed shocked as she looked over at the north bank. From the jungle beneath the four mountain peaks, a violet beam of light shot up into the air at high speed. A moment later, an enormous beast appeared in midair. It was fully 30 meters long, with the body of a horse, the head of a dragon, the scales of a lizard, and the feet of a pangolin. More shocking of all was that its teeth radiated a seven-colored glow. As for its solitary horn, it looked just like the Heavenhorn ink dragon's, long and sharp. Even more astonishingly, violet flames roiled out from its four-clawed feet. A single glance at the flames would shake one down to the soul. They roiled out in all directions, covering an area of 300 meters, creating a huge violet sea of flames. Anyone who looked at the beast within that sea of flames would be shaken to the core, and would most likely gasp in alarm. It seemed like the king of battle beasts, and its appearance caused all of the other battle beasts on the north bank to howl at full force. It seemed almost as if they would heed the call of this king of beasts to charge into battle at any moment, regardless of what their masters ordered. They seemed to be hovering on the brink of losing control. This beast who had just appeared was none other than Bruiser. Bai Xiaochun's Bruiser. The instant Bruiser appeared, the cultivators from the Bloodstream sect felt their minds reeling. Gasps could be heard, and expressions of disbelief appeared on their faces. That was especially true of Song Junwan, whose face fell. One of the Bloodstreak elders gasped, Beast King, how could this be happening? I can't believe a Beast King has appeared, heavens. In the eastern lower reaches of the cultivation world, there are only two Beast Kings. One sleeps beneath the surface of the Heavenspan River, the Heavenspan Divine Crocodile. The other is a death beetle that lives in the depths of the earth. That's not a Beast King. It's only a juvenile. But once it grows up, it will definitely be a Beast King. I never heard of any sect raising its own Beast King. The group from the Bloodstream sect felt their scalps going numb. Even Bai Xiaochun was shocked. Rubbing his eyes, he looked at Bruiser, whose cultivation base was unexpectedly comparable to the early Foundation establishment stage. He remembered that when he'd left the Spirit Stream sect, Bruiser had been roughly in the 10th level of chi condensation. Clearly, he had made a lot of progress since then. Furthermore, all of the battle beasts of the North Bank seemed willing to take orders from him. Although Bai Xiaochun had sensed something to that effect was possible, now it was more clear than ever. Even the old woman from Irispetal Peak hadn't been prepared for Bruiser to make an appearance. The truth was that Bruiser's current state was only a sign of what was to come for the North Bank. Back before he had reached the Foundation establishment level of power, he had been incredible. And yet, he had completely surpassed all expectations, and reached Foundation establishment smoothly and naturally. He hadn't required any assistance, be it a Foundation establishment pill or earth string energy. He just naturally progressed to an energy and battle prowess comparable to Foundation establishment. Even the patriarchs had been shocked, and realized that they had underestimated Bruiser from the beginning. At that point, they realized that he didn't have a 6th-order bloodline, he actually had a 7th-order bloodline. In the lands of Heavenspan, such creatures were called Beast Kings. If Bruiser kept maturing, there was a high likelihood that he would become a true Beast King in the future. The matter had shaken the entire Spirit Stream sect, and they had even arranged for a new place for Bruiser to live. However, he refused to move out of the Beast Conservatory. That was his home, and that was where he enjoyed romping about and playing. However, he would often stare off into the distance. All the Spirit Stream sect disciples knew that he was waiting for someone to return. The woman from Irispetal Peak was shocked, but couldn't bring herself to scold Bruiser. Normally, Bruiser would stick to the beast conservatory, caring for it like a watchdog. Even when he emerged to play, he wouldn't erupt with such fearsome energy, and he definitely wouldn't fly up into the air like a king. Before the shock in the hearts of the cultivators could fade, Bruiser threw his head back and roared. The flame beneath his feet flared, and it was with a wild joy that none could detect that he charged toward the group from the Bloodstream sect. As he closed in, flames surging around him, the countless battle beasts from the north bank burst into motion, flying up into the air to join Bruiser as he charged the group from the Bloodstream sect. From a distance, they were so numerous that they blotted out everything beneath them. The Bloodstream sect cultivators' scalps began to tingle as intense sensations of deadly crisis rose up in their hearts. Song Junwan began panting. Even though she was in the late foundation establishment stage, seeing a beast king like Bruiser left her completely shocked. The Spirit Stream sect really does have a beast king. The truth was that the matter wasn't a huge secret. Word of the Spirit Stream sect's beast king had spread to some degree. Because of Song Junwan's status, she had long since received reports on the matter. However, to see it in person gave her a completely different feeling of threatening danger. The old woman from Irispetal Peak seemed shocked, and immediately attempted to intervene. Bruiser, what are you doing? Back down. However, her words seemed to do no good. There was only one person in Bruiser's eyes. His father. Despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun was masked and in disguise, there was something inside of Bruiser that enabled him to instinctively identify his father. There was no person more dear to him in the world. Bai Xiaochun looked at Bruiser in shock. Beneath his mask, he was smiling warmly. The fact that Bruiser was so powerful left him elated. Furthermore, the exclamations of shock around him got him even more excited. As of this moment, he wished that he could loudly announce, "That's my Bruiser." However, Bai Xiaochun knew that such a thing wasn't possible. He remained within the group of Bloodstream sect cultivators, giving Bruiser a look that only the two of them would be able to understand. "Be a good boy and go back. Dad has a few matters to handle, then he'll come for you." Bruiser suddenly halted in place. He was smart, and had been well trained by Bai Xiaochun. It only took a moment of thought for him to understand what Bai Xiaochun wanted. He bared his teeth at the Bloodstream sect people, radiating an air of incredible ferocity. Then, his gaze shifted to Song Junwan's chest, where it lingered for a long moment. Although few people present knew what that look meant, Bai Xiaochun understood, and he couldn't help but sigh one more time and then glare at Bruiser. Growling, Bruiser bowed his head and then turned and left. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. The other battle beasts let out powerful howls and then returned to their masters' sides. The mountain toppling, sea-draining energy from moments ago faded away until it couldn't even be detected. In that moment, something else happened that no one else detected. Someone in the crowd on Irispetal Peak was looking up at Bai Xiaochun in the Bloodstream sect forces. It was a pretty young woman in plain and simple clothing. A very strange look could be seen in her eyes, and her face was very pale. However, none of that lessened her beauty, it only made her seem more worthy of pity. The young woman smiled, but covered it with her hand as she murmured to herself, "So, sweetie, you're in the Bloodstream sect." A strange flicker of light passed through her eyes. That girl was none other than Gongsun Wanner, who had gone missing in the Fallen Sword Abyss. During the time that Bai Xiaochun had been spending in the Bloodstream sect, she had returned to the Spirit Stream sect. In the moment that Gongsun Wanner looked at Bai Xiaochun, the Heaven Dao aura within him stirred. Sensing that someone was looking at him, he glanced down to try to determine who it was. At the same time, the old woman from Irispetal Peak smiled, thinking to herself that all of her years of spoiling Bruiser had finally paid off. A single order from her had sent him away. "My apologies," she said. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think it would be best if we stayed away from the North Bank." Although her expression was somber, she was inwardly delighted. Song Junwan took a deep breath to calm herself. Although she had been aware that the Spirit Stream sect possessed a Beast King, seeing it with her own eyes left her shaken in a completely different way than before. According to the secret reports, the Beast King was raised by Bai Xiaochun, she mused to herself. He reached Heaven Dao Foundation establishment, and gained enlightenment of the Water Swamp Kingdom. Who exactly is this guy? If only he were a cultivator of the Bloodstream sect. Song Junwan wasn't in the mood for any more touring. Just when she was about to respond to the old woman from Irispetal Peak, a cold snort echoed out from the sky above. An enormous vortex appeared, out of which strode the Song clan patriarch, surrounded by flickering flames. He was followed closely behind by Li Zimo, who had a look of regret on his face. Expression grim, the Song clan patriarch looked back into the vortex, and then at Li Zimo. "Make no mistake, fellow Taoists from the Spirit Stream sect. If war breaks out, the fighting will not stop until the bitter end. The person to respond to the Song clan patriarch wasn't Li Zimo. An ancient, somber face appeared within the vortex, a face that seemed to radiate boundless years of time. When he spoke, the mere sound of his voice caused ripples to spread out in all directions. Your demands are too harsh, fellow Taoist Song. The Spirit Stream sect would rather go to war than be slowly strangled for 1,000 years. This man was none other than the first-generation patriarch of the Spirit Stream sect, Frigid sect. The Song clan patriarch snorted coldly and looked away. Swishing his sleeve, he summoned a blood cloud, and then waved his hand at the Bloodstream sect cultivators. We're leaving, he said. Bai Xiaochun and all the others flew up into the air and landed onto the blood cloud, which seethed as it shot off into the distance. A moment later, not a trace of it could be seen. Everything happened so quickly that the people from the Spirit Stream sect were completely taken aback. The face which had just appeared in the vortex watched as the blood cloud shot away, and his expression turned grimmer by the second. Should we stop Old Man Song? Li Zimo asked slowly. A moment later, the first-generation patriarch replied, Old Man Song has an extraordinary cultivation base. Among the 8 patriarchs of the Bloodstream sect, his battle prowess rates in the top 3. The fact that he visited us alone indicates that he came prepared, especially for tricks. If we provoke him, he certainly won't be bound by morality in his counterstrike. Whether the most important factor was the first or the second, no one could tell. Li Zimo hesitated for a moment. Unable to bear the thought of how many casualties war would bring, he softly said, Brother Frigid sect, the Bloodstream sect doesn't want to go to war either. You can see that from their demands. They've already backed down as far as they can. Why don't we? Zimo, you're being too soft-hearted. At the moment, soft-heartedness won't benefit anybody. I know that many lives will be lost if we go to war. The Spirit Stream sect doesn't want such a catastrophic event to occur. That was why I initially agreed to Song Yunwen's demands that we not go to war. Even if it means missing out on a huge opportunity, we could avoid the destruction of our sect, and the loss of many lives among the younger generation. Frigid sect's ancient voice seemed tired, although no one could hear his words other than Li Zimo and the other patriarchs. We agreed not to attack the Bloodstream sect, nor to join forces with the Sky River Court. Those are demands we could meet. However, there is no way we could agree to the erection of a spell formation on the Heavenspan River. If we allowed the Heavenspan River to dry up in our area, all in order to prevent a catastrophe, the spiritual energy here would grow scarce. Over the course of 1,000 years of being sealed, the cultivation bases of everyone inside the seal would stagnate. Progress would be impossible, and it would only take a few hundred years out of that 1,000-year period for the Spirit Stream sect to wither away into death. Even if the sect still existed 1,000 years later, we would be weak beyond compare. We would simply be giving up our own right to decide our fate, and allowing anyone to come along and destroy us. Fate would be like a sword hanging over our necks. Besides, in 1,000 years, the Bloodstream sect would be completely different than they are today. They would be a great sect in the Middle Reaches, far more powerful than they are now. At that time, they might feel pity on us, and honor their agreement from before. But if they didn't feel like it, they could destroy us as easily as turning over their hand. Within the eyes of the founding patriarch, it was almost possible to see all those future deaths. His voice sounded very grim. Being sealed for 1,000 years would avoid deaths in the moment, but the truth is, it would only be delaying our inevitable destruction. We're actually in a much better situation now, with all the different variables at play. If we do go to war, we might not to be able to defeat the Bloodstream sect on our own, but with the cooperation of other forces, we would have a chance. Zimo, sometimes we patriarchs have to look at the bigger picture, not just the events playing out right in front of us. We have to take the future into consideration. It would be better for the Spirit Stream sect to go out fighting in battle than to gasp and wheeze our way into death 1,000 years from now. Clearly, there is only one path for us. The founding patriarch seemed very tired. After he was finished speaking, he faded back into the vortex. Soon, the vortex itself dissipated. Li Zimo hovered there silently for a moment, the desire to do battle slowly building up in his eyes. Just as the founding patriarch had said, standing and fighting held the hope of survival, whereas hiding away only ensured a tragic end later on. Eventually, orders from sect leader Zheng Yuandong were sent to both the south and north banks. The sect's grand spell formation will be activated, along with all the formations in the Luokan Mountains. All disciples must return to the sect immediately to begin preparing for war. Meanwhile, the blood cloud shot along at top speed in the air between the Spirit Stream sect and the Bloodstream sect. The cultivators from the Bloodstream sect were scared witless. Even the Song clan patriarch's face seemed ashen as he sat at the front of the cloud, frowning in thought. When everyone pondered the words spoken by the Song clan patriarch when he left the vortex, they realized that the discussions with the Spirit Stream sect had not ended well. Apparently, war between the two sects could break out at any moment. That in turn made the return trip to their own sect seem that much more fraught with danger. Master God Diviner's face was pale as he looked down into his lap and performed auguries. Bai Xiaochun also maintained his silence. He knew the big picture, and he knew why the Spirit Stream sect had made their choice. He sighed inwardly. Huge matters that affected the entire sect were things that he didn't qualify to participate in or interfere with. He could only turn his head and look back at the Spirit Stream sect, his heart aching with worry. Song Junwan sat next to the Song clan patriarch at the front of the cloud, her face a mask of vigilance as she scanned the road ahead for potential danger. Everyone else on the cloud simply sat there silently. Time passed. Eventually, the cloud passed through the Luokan Mountains to arrive in Bloodstream sect territory. At that point, the Song clan patriarch's eyes snapped open, and they shone with profound coldness. Not a single ambush had occurred, and in fact, the instant they left Spirit Stream sect territory, the Luokan Mountains began to rumble, and a cascade of light shot up into the sky. A huge barrier now existed, clearly demarcating the boundary between the two sects. After a moment, the Song clan patriarch murmured, "Well played, Spirit Stream sect." Deep in his eyes could be seen both regret and respect. He suddenly waved his sleeve, and 3 motes of light flew out, which transformed into 3 shadowy figures. There was one that Bai Xiaochun recognized immediately. It was none other than Patriarch Limitless. So they didn't intercept us? Those 3 figures were illusory projections of patriarchs of the Bloodstream sect. As soon as they appeared, the cultivators on the cloud clasped hands in formal greeting, Bai Xiaochun included. Then he looked up, shocked at the strange fluctuations emanating from the shadowy figures. "I put myself up as bait," the Song clan patriarch said softly. "Whether because of their righteousness or their suspicions, they allowed me to leave. That in itself is a type of domineering fearlessness. The Spirit Stream sect is indeed a worthy adversary." The other 3 patriarchs maintained their silence. As for Patriarch Limitless, he looked off in the direction of the Spirit Stream sect and shook his head. Sighing softly, he said, "It's too bad. We can't trust them, nor can they trust us." The blood cloud seethed and churned as it shot back to the Bloodstream sect. Everyone was wrapped up in their own thoughts, and no one spoke. Bai Xiaochun was most taciturn of all, although he would occasionally turn to look back in the direction of the Spirit Stream sect. By the time he got back to his Immortals cave on Middle Peak, it was evening. He sat there quietly until it was late in the night and the moon hung high. Unfortunately, the matter of war between the two sects was something he had no say in. It was a game being played between the patriarchs of the two sects. He felt tired. He didn't even like to think about fighting and killing, but he also knew that sometimes, certain things couldn't be avoided, no matter how much he wanted to. He shook his head in frustration. The only thing he could do now was get to the relic of eternal indestructibility before the war started, and then get back to the Spirit Stream sect. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down, then began breathing exercises. Blood chi began to rise up and flow toward him as he continued to advance through the first level of the Undying Heavenly King. That first level was the 10 Mammoth's berserk ghost body, and because of his constant cultivation, he was growing more and more powerful. By now, he had the power of 2 berserk ghosts. After the power of 10, he would break past the first level and transform his berserk ghost body into the heavenly demon body. At the same time, the Heavenspan river water in his first spiritual sea was continuously being absorbed. By now, less than half remained, and from the look of it, it wouldn't take much longer before that portion was fully absorbed. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 2 months went by. During that time, the Bloodstream sect continued to make preparations for war. Of course, war was no laughing matter. Once it started, it would be difficult to stop, and everyone knew that the future of the two sects were involved. The Bloodstream sect wasn't completely united in its desire to wage war. There were 8 patriarchs, and of that group, 4 were of the mindset that war should be avoided if possible. That group consisted of the Song clan patriarch, Patriarch Limitless, and 2 other patriarchs. However, one faction, made up of 3 patriarchs, were staunchly for the war. One of the patriarchs, Taoist sage Drought Flame, had similar standing to the Song clan patriarch, being one of the most powerful experts of the older generation. His words carried much weight. Taoist sage Drought Flame and the other 2 patriarchs in his faction were very much for declaring war. The fact that the Song clan patriarch and his faction had so many problems with the war led to friction between the two groups. The person who had the final say in the Bloodstream sect was the arch-patriarch of the generation, and he hadn't said a word on the subject. His opinion on the matter was of vital importance, but even he seemed to be hesitating. As the discussions and friction between the patriarchs persisted, the Bloodstream sect as a whole continued to prepare for war. Eventually, the day arrived in which the final bit of Heavenspan River water merged into Bai Xiaochun's first spiritual sea. Rumbling sounds filled him that only he could hear. He began to shake, and could sense that his first spiritual sea was shining with boundless golden light. Cracking sounds emanated out, and a moment later, his first spiritual sea began to crystallize. Crystallized spiritual sea. Bai Xiaochun shivered. Panting, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then pushed his hands down onto his Dantian region. Instantly, the crystallization process sped up, and the cracking sounds grew more intense. Moments later, his entire first spiritual sea had become solid. Instead of liquid, it now was a mirror-like crystal. In the instant that it completely crystallized, it erupted with a power 10 times the level of the original spiritual sea. That power filled Bai Xiaochun, causing him to tremble, and making him feel completely different than before. In Mortal Dao Foundation establishment, there was only one spiritual sea. In fact, there was so little water in it that it was more like a spiritual lake. Only Earthstring Foundation establishment cultivators could use tide flows to form multiple spiritual seas. The difference between spiritual lakes and spiritual seas was one reason for the huge disparity between Mortal Dao and Earthstring Foundation establishment. When it came to advancing through the Foundation establishment stage, the crystallization of the spiritual seas was the hallmark of mid-Foundation establishment. The crystallization was a major transformation that caused the basic foundation to become 10 times stronger. Because Earthstring spiritual seas were already vastly more powerful than Mortal Dao spiritual lakes, the disparity between the two levels of Foundation establishment only grew greater from that point on. At the same time, the number of Earthstring tide flows affected the number of spiritual seas, and that in turn made the difference between those different levels even more clear. When it came to Earthstring Foundation establishment, 3 crystallized spiritual seas marked the mid-level. To reach late Foundation establishment, one had to reach 6 crystallized spiritual seas. The Great Circle of Foundation establishment was 9. Of course, people with 9 spiritual seas were as rare as phoenix feathers or Qilin horns, so the above standard would apply only to them. The same general principles applied to the other levels of Foundation establishment. For example, in Mortal Dao Foundation establishment, the Great Circle was a single crystallized spiritual sea. However, that level of power was, at best, the same as a single crystallized spiritual sea of Earthstring Foundation establishment. That was one of the main reasons why it was virtually impossible for any Mortal Dao Foundation establishment cultivator to reach core formation. It was the same with Earthstring Foundation establishment cultivators who only completed a single tide flow. However, because they had a true spiritual sea, it was theoretically possible for them to crystallize it and break through to the next cultivation stage. However, the likelihood was very small. When it came to 2 spiritual seas, that likelihood increased. 5 spiritual seas was considered the standard, and anyone with 7 was deemed highly likely to succeed. 8 spiritual seas was very rare, and even more likely to break through, and those with 9 were considered 90% likely to break through. However, all of that pertained to Mortal Dao and Earthstring. When it came to the extremely rare peak of Foundation establishment, those cultivators who used Heaven String energy to create a Heaven Dao aura were not only 10 times as powerful, but their crystallized spiritual seas could crush Earthstring Foundation establishment. That was especially true of Bai Xiaochun, who had achieved 9 tide flows. Essentially, he could crush any and all fellow Foundation establishment cultivators. In early Foundation establishment, the disparity wasn't as obvious. However, mid-Foundation establishment involved an explosive increase in power, and once in the Great Circle of Foundation establishment, he could be called invincible. Crystallizing the sea is the sign of stepping into mid-Foundation establishment. Excited, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath. The crystallization didn't stop with the first spiritual sea. It continued on into the second spiritual sea, which immediately began to show signs of solidifying. Intense cracking sounds filled his mind for the following several hours. His cultivation base grew explosively, and soon, his second spiritual sea was crystallized, and the process progressed to the third. Rumble. The process continued until the following morning. As the first rays of sunlight landed on the earth below, rumbling sounds filled Bai Xiaochun, and his eyes snapped open. At that point, he could feel a level of spiritual power coursing through him that vastly exceeded what it had been before. Now that he had 3 crystallized spiritual seas, every breath he took seemed to fill his surroundings with thunderous booms. He now felt like the simple wave of his hand could crush everything around him. Furthermore, his forehead tingled with pain, as though his heaven-span Dharma eye wished to open. Bai Xiaochun had the intense premonition that if he did open that eye, it would erupt with shocking fluctuations. Eyes glittering, he burst into motion. Spiritual power surged through him, and rumbling sounds could be heard as he turned into nothing more than afterimages. A moment later, he was outside in front of one of the blood trees. The blood tree shivered and began to rattle off fawning praise. Unlike usual, Bai Xiaochun didn't pay any attention to the tree. Instead, his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and he pointed out, causing streams of blood chi to converge into a blood sword. I can form blood swords way faster than before. Excited, he mentally recalled Middle Peak's secret magic, the blood annihilation world. After performing another incantation gesture, he waved his hand, and even more blood chi converged in the area, and another blood sword appeared. Things weren't over yet, though. A third blood sword appeared, swirling around him, causing the entire area to surge with a bloody, murderous aura. Intense pressure also weighed down in the area, causing all of the blood trees to tremble. In mid-foundation establishment, I'm not limited to 1 blood sword. I can summon 3, and furthermore, I can even combine them together into 1 larger sword. Eyes flashing, he performed another incantation gesture with his right hand, and the 3 blood swords merged together into a gigantic blood-colored greatsword. Even when the blade was still forming, its energy fluctuations were filled with brutality and madness. Everything in the area trembled, and even before it could finish forming, Bai Xiaochun waved his hand to dispel the sword and the pressure. According to the description of the secret magic, if I can summon 6 swords, I'll be able to step into late foundation establishment. Although I cultivate the Violet Chi Heavenspan incantation, because of the Undying Live Forever technique, once I reach late foundation establishment, I can use the blood annihilation world along with it. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with how quickly had progressed from early foundation establishment to mid-foundation establishment. Some of that was because of the medicinal pills the mysterious sect had given him, but another reason was the blood chi in the bloodstream sect. Not only could he rapidly cultivate the undying Heavenly King, it also provided benefits to his cultivation base. Bai Xiaochun clasped his hands behind his back and stuck his chin up. Looking very proud of himself, he thought about how incredible he was with his 3 crystallized spiritual seas. Of course, if he could reach 6 or 9, then he would be even more powerful. Taking advantage of the darkness of night, Bai Xiaochun left Middle Peak. Going down to the bottom of the giant's hand, he actually left the bloodstream sect and went to the bank of the Heavenspan River. Considering his current status and level, getting some Heavenspan River water wasn't very difficult. All he had to do was make up a random reason, and the cultivators guarding the way would let him pass. After arriving, he collected 10 drops of water. Soon, he had a small cup full, which he carefully took back to his immortals cave and then began to absorb. A few days later, the water was inside of him, above his 4th spiritual sea. At that point, he ended this session of cultivation. Next, I need to fully merge the Heavenspan River water into my spiritual sea. Once that happens, I can step into late foundation establishment. Excited, he left his immortals cave, hands clasped behind his back as he soliloquized proudly to himself. Now that I'm in mid-foundation establishment, I'm even more awesome than before. Becoming a Grand Elder doesn't seem so impossible now. He looked up at the upper finger of Middle Peak. It was really depressing to know exactly where the relic of eternal indestructibility was, but be unable to reach it. He had long since given up any aspirations of somehow sneaking in to get the relic of eternal indestructibility. Song Junwan's immortals cave was too well guarded, and he had no confidence in being able to succeed. How can I actually become the Grand Elder? Challenge Song Junwan? Bai Xiaochun rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The challenge would only be secondary, though. First I'd have to win over the masses. Plus I need to convince the leadership that I'm important, that I'm a crucial member of the sect. That's the only way that I could successfully challenge Song Junwan and then take over her position. Nodding to himself, he decided that this was definitely the right track to follow. With that, he stuck his chin up proudly. I'm already halfway there. If I want people to think I'm important, though, I need to do something that leaves everybody completely shaken. As far as he was concerned, it wouldn't be too difficult to do such a thing. He had already been in the bloodstream sect for some time, and knew quite well that apothecaries were few and far between. The leadership of the sect placed a high value on them, and had even established certain sect rules to encourage disciples to walk that path. However, the very nature of the bloodstream sect essentially doomed such efforts from the beginning. The bloodstream sect was fundamentally a devilish sect, and most disciples viewed concocting medicine as a waste of time. They would much rather study techniques to increase their battle prowess. If they needed medicinal pills, they could simply go rob people from the pill stream sect. If they needed magical items, they could take them from profound stream sect disciples. If they needed spirit beasts, they could get them from the spirit stream sect. Therefore, few people focused on concocting medicine. There were some who could, such as Imposter Nightcrypt back in the day, but in a huge sect like this, they were completely insufficient to meet the needs of the sect as a whole. It's been a long time since I've concocted any medicine. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he began to chuckle. As his laughter drifted out into the night, the blood trees began to tremble, apparently because of the sinister nature of the laughter. However, before I actually concoct any medicine, I need to solve one problem. I did a bit of medicine concocting earlier, but if I suddenly do something too incredible, people will get suspicious. I need the right opportunity. With that, his eyes narrowed. Supposedly, the holy pill wall fragment here was actually robbed from the pill stream sect 10,000 years ago, for the express purpose of allowing disciples to seek enlightenment of the Tao of medicine. HMPH. I can just pretend to gain enlightenment there, and then start concocting some medicine. Then nobody will be suspicious at all. Once again, he laughed out loud proudly. He'd actually planned to do this for quite a while, and now, the timing seemed perfect. The following morning, he left his immortals cave without the slightest hesitation. Leaving Middle Peak, he headed toward the area in the inner sect district where the holy pill wall fragment was located. Soon he arrived in front of the enormous stone stele that was as tall as 3 people put together. This was his second time coming here, the first being when he'd seen Shui Mei. At that time, Shui Mei had looked at him as if she were eyeing a bug. This was his second time, and even from a distance, he could see a few inner sect disciples sitting below the stele, looking at it thoughtfully. His appearance caused the inner sect disciples' expressions to flicker. They quickly rose to their feet and offered formal greetings. Not daring to be near him, they left, and by the time he was actually in front of the stone stele, he was completely alone. Rubbing his chin, he coughed dryly and sat down cross-legged. Feeling very comfortable with this sort of situation, he looked up at the wall fragment and reviewed what Imposter Nightcrypt had told him. 8,000 years ago, a genius rose up in the bloodstream sect who was very adept in the Tao of medicine. After seeking enlightenment from this wall fragment, his ability to concoct medicine improved significantly. I guess that means the shrew Shui Mei was here to try to get some enlightenment, huh? He couldn't help but feel a bit disdainful of the idea. He was of the belief that although certain degrees of enlightenment were required when it came to medicine concocting techniques, it wasn't something that could come overnight. Constant practice was required, along with gradual progress. That was the way to achieve mastery. Although it was possible that enlightenment could be gained from this wall fragment, Bai Xiaochun was certain that it would be useless to a disciple who didn't have a basic understanding of medicine concocting to begin with. It should be enough to just put on a bit of a show so that people think I'm gaining enlightenment. Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat and then focused on the wall fragment, trying to reach the same mental state he'd stumbled into when he'd gained enlightenment from the beast statue in the spirit stream sect. I just need to imitate what happened back then, he thought. With that, he did his best to imitate his past facial expression. He opened his eyes wide, staring at the wall. Strangely, as he stared at the wall, it felt as if his mind were being drained. Although he was surprised, he did nothing to stop it from happening. 3 days went by. Quite a few inner sect disciples passed the wall fragment, and when they saw Bai Xiaochun, they noticed that his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands seemed to be moving. His expression was completely blank, which created quite an odd picture. Senior Nightcrypt, are you? Is he really gaining enlightenment? Heavens! It's been a really long time since anybody actually gained enlightenment here. Is Senior Nightcrypt really pulling it off? The inner sect disciples were shocked, and soon, word began to spread. Foundation establishment cultivators from all of the 4 peaks heard the news, and many went over to see for themselves. Another 7 days passed, during which time Bai Xiaochun's vision began to swim. In order to make sure everything looked as real as possible, he continued to stare at the wall for 10 days and 10 nights. Soon, he started to look as if he were in a daze, and actually, it was no farce. He really was zoning out. It was a deep and profound daze that actually looked like enlightenment, to the point where no outsider would be able to tell the difference. His mind was weakening. After all, he had just broken through into mid-foundation establishment and had no way to quickly recover at the moment. The time he spent in a daze increased, until eventually he realized that he had spent almost half the day in such a state. By this point, he decided that he'd probably put on enough of a show. Just when he was about to finish up and put on a show of reaping some amazing reward from his efforts, a tremor ran through him. Before he could look away, his eyes went wide, and he suddenly stared fixedly at the wall fragment. He began to pant heavily, and his pupils constricted. He wasn't sure if he was hallucinating or not, but moments ago, just as he had been about to look away from the wall, he'd seen a blurry figure that appeared to be concocting medicine. From what he'd seen, the method was different from what he'd learned about the Tao of medicine. Whoa! A tremor ran through him. Settling down, he once again stared at the wall fragment, focusing all of his attention, which drained him even more rapidly than before. Moments later, his soul seemed to leave his body and enter the wall, to appear right next to that blurry figure. Upon closer inspection, Bai Xiaochun was certain that he was looking at someone concocting medicine. He wasn't sure of the exact type of spirit medicine that was being concocted, but the apothecary's methods were fantastic. Apparently, he wasn't even using a pill formula. He casually selected 2 types of medicinal plants, and then called upon the principles of mutual augmentation and suppression, not to force out the impurities, but cause transformations. A new type of medicinal strength appeared, a power which he imbued into other medicinal plants to alter them. He did everything in a completely smooth and natural way. Occasionally, the ingredients in the pill furnace would explode with force, at other times they were calm. Sometimes they seethed, sometimes they were as quiet as death. Regardless of the transformations or the eruptions of power, the apothecary maintained full control the entire time. He controlled every aspect with skill and deftness. This Tao of medicine was very different from what Bai Xiaochun had learned in the Spirit Stream sect. The apothecary in the wall fragment was on a completely different level. It almost seemed like the Spirit Stream sect's Tao of medicine was for amateurs, whereas what this apothecary was using were the methods of an expert. He's not concocting medicine, he's actually creating plants and vegetation. Bai Xiaochun forgot about the passage of time. He was completely focused on watching the shadowy figure in the wall fragment. Eventually, the figure finished concocting the batch of medicine, and opened the pill furnace. What appeared in his hands was a green medicinal pill that actually looked like a plant. Bai Xiaochun's mind filled with rumbling, along with faint comprehension. Before concocting medicine, you have to refine the plants and vegetation. Depending on the medicinal strength you seek, you search through countless medicinal plants. If you can't find what you're looking for, you make your own. The limits of the Tao of medicine rely only on the limits of your imagination, and your skill in concocting medicinal plants and vegetation. Bai Xiaochun felt like his mind was being struck by lightning, and he even began to shake physically. It was with deep and utter excitement that he immersed himself within the images in the wall fragment. At the same time, the holy pill wall fragment began to emit a green light. As the light grew more and more intense, it transformed into a green pillar that shot high up into the sky. The entire bloodstream sect was being shaken to the core. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.